The llama is back.
Am I the llama?
High-resolution color graphics.
This land of high technology. The revolution in technology that made the information age possible.
Those kids are not afraid of computers.
WinAmp gets whipped.
I's a fan of DOS.
And Clash of the Spectrum games.
All this and more coming up in This Week in Retro, right now.
Up-to-date news for out-of-date tech. Hello, chaps. Welcome to another episode of This Week in Retro. We have a familiar face with us. It's Mark from Mark Fixes Stuff, who's been here before, but I wasn't here, so it's nice to get a chance to hang out with you today, Mark.
Yeah, it's nice to be here on a day you're not skiving off, Neil. Very nice.
So, how's your week been, Mark? Let's start with you. What have you been up to?
Well, I've been doing a few things. I have been working on my glass Amiga case. Here you go. I'm trying to get this thing to fit
so this
together.
Was a crystal clear Amiga case for people who are listening. You got it from PCBWay, not an advertising slot we're shoehorning in there. You worked with them to get this crystal clear Amiga 600 case, and from what I've seen so far of it, it looks pretty spot on.
It looks pretty spot on, but there's a varnish around the side that changes the dimensions somewhat. So there's going to be a bit of finagling to get it to go together. So, I've been working on that. And, just generally sitting around the house in my shorts, watching daytime TV, the usual glorious life of a YouTuber. Well,
oh, yes, it's just like that, yes.
And going to work as well, of course.
Yeah. Look out for that finagling, good word, on Mark's channel soon with his Amiga 600. This week, in fact, by the time this show goes out, I've got an exciting little announcement for you. We've been working with Heber to come up with a new product. It's not Heber, it's Heber.
Heber. There's Heber.
You remember Heber made the multi-system for that Mr. console. They've come up with a super low latency joystick device, which is called the Control Dock. The first one is the Control Dock Classic SE. Yeah. And that one is supporting Neo Geo controllers, D9 devices, but not just digital, also analog devices and multiple ones. So you can have your Amiga joystick and mouse, Atari joystick and mouse, paddles with multiple sensitivity settings, loads of stuff like that. So I'll put a link in the show notes. I'll get my own video up soon about it, but I'm excited about it because it's a product that I want. I've got, I've got various adapters, but they don't support analog or they're not very quick. Yeah. So it's nice to have one that's spot on. I've
got one actually. I've got one in the house.
Yeah,
and I've been using it to play Second with two Arcader joysticks. Second it's got the kind of one joystick to move and one joystick to fire from Hoffman, so it works great for that.
A twin stick shooter, a la Robotron.
Twin stick shooter was what the words I couldn't remember to say were. Yes.
Yeah. And what's nice is with digital sticks, we managed to get the latency down. The lowest I've seen so far is 0.7 milliseconds, which is pretty quick.
Oh, there's going to be outrage. There's going to be outrage amongst the 40-somethings with their lightning reaction.
Chris, tell us about your week. What have you been doing down under?
Not that much this week, besides work. Week before, brought together a project that I've been sort of planning and trying to get the stuff together for a long time. And actually, I have Dave to thank because he helped me with some of the software that I needed. But basically, comparing an A1200 to essentially a 386, mimicking the exact same 386 I had back in the day. So that was basically just me experimenting with an alternative timeline. Would I have been happy with an A1200? So it was a really fun rabbit hole to go down, I must say. But yeah, that's what I've been doing.
Nice. You do seem to revisit this quite a lot, recreating experiences of old and then going down the alternative timeline. That's a nice thing to do because it makes all of your videos so personal.
Oh,
you're just recalling all of those memories and it makes it very warm and nice to watch.
Wait for an up-and-coming Spectrum one where I unfortunately relive having to try and reload a Spectrum tape about 10 times before the damn thing actually loads. Oh. Yeah, there's some bits of nostalgia that shouldn't be revisited.
That's an authentic experience, though, Chris.
It's true.
It's an authentic experience. Our tape loading error.
Yeah.
Dave, do you have a weekly update or did you want to go straight into your housekeeping this week?
I feel as if last week was yesterday. My time just goes too fast. I've done nothing this week. Nothing of note anyway. So let's go into housekeeping.
Let's go.
Into the wonderful. Into the wonderful. I'd like to welcome 6 new patrons, including our 50th patron. 6, I know, including our 50th patron, Mike. Also, Mr. Lutch, Fat Boy, Brian, Stephen with a PH, and Stephen with a V. Thank you very much for signing up.
Thank you, everyone.
It really does make a difference. You can sign up if you'd like to at www.patreon.com/thisweekinretro. And we've also had a review, so thank you very much to Rude316, who said, if you're even vaguely into retro or vintage computer scene, I cannot recommend this podcast enough. I'm a pretty casual collector of old systems and games, but I have learnt so much about so many sides of retro computing, systems, games, tips, and more. It's such a friendly, relaxing thing to listen to every Saturday morning, and the guys have a great chemistry. Long may it continue. What a nice thing to see. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Rude.
I mean, obviously he listened to the one that I was on, so I'll take all the credit for that.
Have to assume that, because every other episode's been rubbish.
Yeah.
WinAmp gets whipped. So WinAmp has to be one of our most fondly remembered apps ever made. A no-nonsense media player with a user interface designed to look kind of like a hi-fi stack system. We used it to play music. And for many of us, it was the perfect companion to our newly built library of downloaded or maybe ripped MP3 files at the time. Perhaps using WinAmp for you went hand in hand with running Napster and leeching all of those music files and discovering music. Or maybe you diligently put every CD that you owned into the computer and ripped a library of your own, thinking that you'd never need a CD again, only to take up vinyl record collecting 20 years later. Well, I'm talking about WinAmp as if it's dead, but not so. Not so on two fronts, according to an article shared by listener Squelch411. This article was written by Thomas Macaulay on thenextweb.com. On the one hand, apparently WinAmp is still used by 83 million people. Do any of you guys still use it?
No.
No?
Nope.
Shaking heads? No? Okay. And on the other, it's just been relaunched. Yes, WinAmp is back. Now, we did mention this many episodes ago that there were plans to relaunch WinAmp. I think it was the topic of one of our stories. Well, here we are. It's happened. So for some, it never went away. For others, it's back. And I think that applies to all 4 of us. It is back. Having originally been sold for $80 million in 1999 to AOL, remember them?
Yeah.
It was sold on again to Radionomy in 2013. So I don't think AOL got the return on their investment that they were perhaps expecting, as happened with so many things that were bought off the internet in the 90s. Various people have tried to revive the brand, and the latest attempt means that it's no longer a standalone app that we remember. Doesn't look like a hi-fi anymore. It's web-based, of course. So I signed up today to have a little look at it and see what it was like. So let's give it a chance. You register for an account at winamp.com. It immediately feels familiar, but not familiar like WinAmp. Familiar kind of like MySpace, if I'm honest.
Oh, dear.
Felt a bit MySpacey. Felt a bit like Deezer, if you've ever been on the website Deezer.
Yes.
In its color scheme. And then once you're in, you have to build a page of creators. So by default, you're following DJ Mike Lama. Do you remember him?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, when you opened WinAmp originally, it said it. WinAmp, it really...
Llamas.
Yeah.
Oops, the llamas.
And the artist of that MP3 file was DJ Mike Lama. So he's there, you're automatically following him. He's like Tom. Yeah, he's like Tom from MySpace. And then
Tom.
What a creator can do on WinAmp is post blogs, albums, and subscription tiers. You can subscribe to a creator for perks. All pretty simple. So I went hunting around for artists, big sigh from Dave there, hunting around for creators to listen to. And I've got to say, this isn't taking off, lads. You can drill down to regions. So I drilled down to the UK. I found 8 artists in the whole of the UK.
Oh.
And some of them, you can listen to tunes. Some of them, you can't listen to a single tune from them unless you take out their subscription, which in many cases is €5 a month. So I can't even get a flavor of what their music is like at first. I guess maybe you would have had to have discovered them on YouTube or some other service, and then you come and subscribe to them here. So on the one hand, I want to see artists supported, but on the other, how much music can I actually listen to at €5 per subscription to listen to artists? doesn't quite add up in my head how this is supposed to work. However, let's push on. There's also podcasts in there, plenty of familiar ones, but that's pretty easy. That's just pulling RSS feeds, so that's low-hanging fruit for WinAmp. And likewise, there's radio stations as well. In fact, that's the one feature that I found myself using, popping the radio on in the background while I did some work. Hardly groundbreaking and something you could do in old WinAmp anyway. As well as podcasts, I'm pretty sure you could just open an RSS feed in WinAmp. You could put all kinds of links into WinAmp and open it across the internet radio and all the rest. So I guess that side of things worked nicely, but I am desperately scrabbling for some positives here from my experience of using it. But it gets better. I explored the options further and I saw the words that we all dread when a cherished brand is revived. Coming soon. NFTs. So that's a new WinAmp, guys. Have you tried it? What do you make of it, Chris?
No, I haven't tried it, and nothing that you've just described excites me at all. I mean, I used WinAmp back in the day. We've discussed that before, but it seriously isn't something I find myself pining for at all. You know, yes, we enjoyed the visualizations, but then Media Player actually followed suit with that pretty quick, and that actually became, dare I say, good. You know, after they saw people swapping to WinAmp, Media Player became acceptable. So in the modern day, for myself, I'm team Spotify. I hate to say it, you know, and why would I look for another platform? And this to me is like, and I say this as an Amiga user and fan, as we know, but it's like trying to revive Amiga OS and using it instead of Windows just because nostalgia. There's no point for me. So yeah, that's my take on it.
It's like an Atari-style rebrand, isn't it? Somebody's come along, said, oh, look, this is vaguely reminiscent to a certain sector of people. Let's buy that name and slap it on a completely unrelated product and then try and shoehorn that IP into people's lives. You know, I like to support independent artists. I like to go and see bands that perhaps aren't signed. And I do actually support a couple of bands on things like Bandcamp. But those artists are also on Spotify, and I can go and listen to their music. And when you are a creator, you need to be where the audience is. And if there is a barrier to a platform, listening to that artist of paying €5 a month, well, then it's not going to happen, you know. Yeah, I mean, I used WinAmp back in the day, pre-AOL acquisition. And don't forget, that was one of the only real ways to listen to some sorts of digital music back then. So you know, you got to frame it through that reference. That's why it's remembered fondly. But I've got to be honest, it's filling a niche that doesn't exist anymore now. You know,
I mean, did it ever exist? This approach, would it have ever worked? You know, is it 20 years too late, or would it never have worked?
I don't think it would have ever have worked. I mean, if you could have offered this back when WinAmp was out, then sure, yeah, it would have been great, but that's impossible. That's like saying, well, you know, imagine a PlayStation 2 back in 1987. It's not going to happen. And to be honest, I've spoken about WinAmp and it whips the llama's ass and all that with even sort of fellow old heads, and some people simply don't remember it. So I'm not sure that nostalgia cloud necessarily envelops everybody of a certain age. So I feel like it's doomed.
That's
really.
a good point, actually. I think there's probably a convergence of a time and place with WinAmp when, if, for example, you were a teenager or a later teenager and you were just discovering music and you were just figuring out your tastes and you were exploring lots of music, then WinAmp was essential. But maybe you weren't in that place at the time.
Definitely. I mean, for me, I used it to access internet radio, so some of the American rock and metal stations that you didn't get in the UK. And that was its primary focus for me. So it was a gateway to stuff that I couldn't hear elsewhere. But you know, that just changed so rapidly. I mean, that even changed within AOL, and that's why I think they got rid of it in the end, because they just built it into AOL. So there you go. That's my take, and it's not a good one, fellas. Sorry.
Dave, I don't think this is going to be positive. Give us both barrels.
No. I mean, I think it's garbage. It's the same thing that we see again and again in the modern world. How do we take something that people love and then slap some modern nonsense over the top of it? And in this case, it's let's get people to pay subscriptions for music to individual artists while using the fond memories of the MP3 player, and really without detracting from the original WinAmp, which was great. The fond memories we have are probably more to do with the music and suddenly being able to discover loads of different music by downloading it on the internet, where we didn't quite have that before. So maybe we're trying to grab that a nostalgia for that rather than the WinAmp itself, Neil.
Yeah, and just simple things like being able to go out with your whole library of music. You know, that was new at the time. It's just all these things are wrapped up in the whole MP3 movement. It was a time and a place that if you didn't experience it, I'm not saying you can't understand it. I'm just saying there were a lot of excited feelings involved in that whole thing. Yeah.
So let's not forget what was good about WinAmp. It worked really well. It was clean and neat and fast. It wasn't laggy. It didn't have loads of support libraries. It didn't rely on all sorts of other things you need to have in the background and logins and all the rest of it. And this doesn't feel anything like it at all. But maybe we just need to forget the modern scammy feeling iteration of something that we loved and not let it ruin the original thing that we do like.
Yeah, and here's the thing. There are some apps that just don't need to change beyond security updates, compatibility, and bug fixes. And WinAmp does feel like one of those programs, as you just said, and it's still available. You can from winamp.com. You don't have to sign up for this service. You can still find the old app. You can download it. You can install it. And that dependable old friend is still there. I installed it today. I haven't used it for decades. So after using the online experience, I downloaded the standalone installer, got it installed, and it was exactly as I remembered. Although I did have to put it in the double pixel mode on my 4K monitor to make it at all usable because it was tiny. It was so hard to see. So I'm already thinking, can we have some more scaling options? But surely they're not going to update this version of it with their new online version. But then that's what happened, thinking back. Other players came along that mimicked WinAmp. Can you remember, I'm trying to remember the name of the one that got really popular. Anyone, any ideas? Throw any names out there? Maybe Foobar. Yeah, was it Foobar 2000 or something like that?
Foobar 2000 was when I moved to it. It was great, so powerful.
Yeah. So that kind of carried the torch for WinAmp onwards. But it is still there. You can still download it. And I did that today, and I started listening to some radio stations just like I did in the old days with the classic skin. But I did spot something, even in the classic app, when you go to your playlists and you start looking at the radio stations, at the bottom of the list there, NFT library. So there you go. Ignoring that, I am having some good times just enjoying the classic WinAmp back on my PC. It's back on the list of reliable apps, although I may try Foobar 2000 to replace it now that we've figured out the name of it. But it's up there with 7-Zip. It's up there with Classic Shell as those apps that I will probably use forever and hopefully never need to change. So in one iteration or another, long live WinAmp.
We are sponsored, thank you very much, to Pixel Addict magazine. It's a new month, and what that means is 6 weeks have passed, so it's a new month, and there's a new issue of Pixel Addict out. I believe by the time this episode comes out, you'll be able to buy it. This month is a PC special, which suits me, and there's a great front cover of an IBM-style CRT with kind of Prince of Persia and Duke 3D running on it. I've had a flick through. I've not had a chance to sit down and read it, but a flick through is a Tony Warrener Q&A interview. So that's following on from last month's Broken Sword stuff. And there is something on OpenTTD, which is Open Transport Tycoon Deluxe.
Ooh, nice.
Yeah, I know, Neil. That's right.
One of my favourites. And also Tony's probably promoting his book in there, Revolution, which is about his time at Revolution Software. And I also noticed on the cover is something called the Lambda 8300. Have you spotted that? It's a Chinese ZX Spectrum clone, and just by pure coincidence, one arrived in the cave last week.
Ooh, so, that's nice.
There we go. Got one of those. Yeah. Mark, what's your favourite article from this new edition?
I've not read it.
At least he's honest.
You assume I can read. That's ableist.
So I saw an article recently just saying that the last two magazines from back in the day have now been discontinued in America. So the last ever old, retro, vintage, I guess is the word I'm looking for. The last ever vintage computer magazines are no longer on sale in America. And it takes magazines like this now to fill the vacuum, because there is still a demand for this kind of thing, I think. Chris?
I believe Railway Modeler is still going. So there you go. Railway.
Oh,
Yeah,
I did
that's
see.
fun.
I saw on eBay you can buy a complete set of Carp magazine, Carp Monthly,
Fantastic.
and there must have been about 800 issues. This was a huge eBay auction. Anyway, I don't know how we've got from Pixel Addict to Carp magazine. Mark,
got
why
it.
don't you share with everyone the web address to go and find out more about Pixel Addict, Mark?
Ooh, where is it? Is it
Pixel.addict.media.
Repeat after Dave, Mark.
Pixel.addict.media.
Perfect.
Click to get your fix.
Oh,
You can buy it in your local newsagent. You can order it online to be delivered to your house, or you can buy PDF copies. It is a good read. Unlike us, it's very professional. In the first IBM PCs, an ISA Industry Standard Architecture was created, which was an expansion slot. And then later, it turned from 8-bit to 16-bit. And they stayed with us until right around the Pentium 2 era, at the end of the 1990s, where they quickly declined and disappeared. And after the Pentium 3, around that period, you would find it difficult to get an ISA card into your PC. Now, it's not generally a bad thing, because they were too slow of a system bus for most things. They went out of date, but they were super important for one reason. And if you're a DOS enthusiast, or if you've listened to me rabbiting on about it in the past, then it's sound cards. You need an ISA slot for a proper DOS sound card to work best. And if you want to build a really, really cheap hardware DOS machine, then the ISA slot is the thing that you'll probably find is the thing that's in your way. Because without an ISA slot, you can get something for absolutely buttons off eBay. You get something that's pretty much e-waste if you don't have the ISA slot to get. But if you do have the ISA slot, you're a little bit more restricted in what you get. Now, thanks to Derek Flamelily for submitting this story, and it's someone we have talked about before, as a fellow Scot who has a YouTube channel, The Rastery, and he does lots of fun projects, and being practical isn't always his top priority. He does it because he wants to, because they're interesting, and because it can be done. But I would argue that everything he's done has a purpose, and they're all great. And it turns out that the ISA bus is still present, although without a slot in modern boards, of course, but it's still there in the architecture. Now, it might not be particularly useful for anything, but it's still there for various different little things that the computer does in the background. And he found out that you can access it through various different vias on a motherboard, but if you use the TPM slot, the Trusted Platform Module slot, then on most boards you can access all of the ISA pins through this, which enabled him to build an adapter to plug an ISA sound card into a modern PC.
That must have been a eureka moment for him when he was sort of sussing out all the vias, going, how can I patch in an ISA adapter?
Yeah.
Oh, well, they all go to this slot anyway. That must have been brilliant.
Yeah, so it's a little pin header that you put the Trusted Platform module in. You need it for Windows 11, for example, but you can expose the ISA bus there. And he's done it. He's made this adapter that you can plug an ISA card in, and it works. Now, it might not be particularly usable. In fact, I think you might manage one or two edge cases, perhaps, if you're using a high resolution on a build engine game. So that's like Blood or Redneck Rampage or something like that. If you're using a really high resolution, it hammers the CPU. So perhaps there's a justification to get a higher, to get a faster CPU in there with an ISA sound card. But realistically, since you can only use it in DOS games, and DOS gaming didn't need the fastest Pentium 3 around, going to the hassle of adding it to a more modern board isn't really that wise. And also, by the time you've saved the money on getting your 15 quid e-waste board to do this too, but by the time you've added that onto it, it's probably easier just to get a Pentium 2 or a Pentium 3 board. Maybe at a stretch, you would want to have a machine that can run and really run Windows XP really well. And also, be able to have an ISA sound card in there. Maybe there's a stretch for that. I don't know, but it's a stretch. And he's called the project, he's added a D and appointment to the end of ISA, and he's called it the disappointment. So I think he's probably well aware of this already, but it is really cool. Neil, what do you think of it? And do you think there's any projects that are that are tough to justify, but they are still super cool and you'd want to do them anyway? What do you think?
Well, it reminds me of, I think around about 2017, 2018, I tried a PCI Express to PCI adapter. No, yes, that was the way around it was. And I had mixed results. I mean, the main problem I ran into was that even when I did get it working, you were lacking any drivers for your legacy cards on a modern OS. And that was just me putting an adapter in. That wasn't me trying to trace vias and create a custom loom or anything like that. It was just slapping in a cheap PCI Express to PCI adapter, which when I look back on it, had some very shoddy soldering on it, even off the shelf. It was cheap. It was nasty and it was cheap. So I didn't find much use for it. I think the furthest I got it working was firing up Linux and getting a sound card working through Linux. It was tricky in Windows, but that's not what he's doing here. He's installed DOS and he's trying to create a retro machine with a Pentium 3, I think you said. So he's not trying to use an ISA video card. And notice I said ISA, Dave, ISA video card in Windows 11. ISA. So I think you're right, Dave. It's not particularly useful, but anyone who's asking the question why is forgetting the joy that comes from poking around and just trying things out for the sheer pleasure of it and setting yourself problems that you want to challenge yourself to overcome. And that was really nice to watch this unfold in the video. So I've got no criticisms whatsoever, really, despite the outcome of this. And I guess one use case that you could come up with this is to house the adapter in a 3D printed case because it's separate from the main board. So if you could have it external to your PC case, you could have it as a nice little ISA device tester. Couldn't you just slot things in, take them out?
It's a good use.
I mean, it wouldn't be hot swappable, but you could pop things in and see if they still work. That would be useful.
Is there really a need for this? I mean, honestly, is there really a need for this with old PCs sort of still in abundance? I mean,
no.
I know what you're saying about when you put it on eBay, there's a tax for the ISA slot. And notice I said ISA there, Dave, not ISA. But to be honest, I mean, there's still loads out there. If you go on sort of FreeCycle or Freegal, there's loads of people saying, "Oh, I found this in my shed. You can have it for now," and they're Pentium 2s and below. So, but I'm not one to dash innovation. I mean, sometimes you should just do things because you can, and I do love a bit of blue sky thinking. I think rather than a product, this is more of a, "Hey guys, look what I found out," you know. And that's brilliant. It's absolutely great, and I applaud it. Will I be using it? It's probably a hard pass from me when there's easier options. But, you know, kudos to Derek for this. It's pretty mental and out there.
It is one of those YouTube videos where you think, I'm watching this so that I don't have to do it. Someone else has done it, and I can just enjoy their journey in doing it.
Yeah.
So true. I think we're all on the same page here. I mean, it's a great niche idea, and I love it. I love that it existed and it's been done, and he's found a way to do it. I must confess, when I first watched it, I was expecting something that was kind of more plug and play, whereas you're seeing patching wires here, there, and everywhere, and getting different signals from different places on the board. I'm like, yeah, that's not the level of hobbyist I would bother to become at any point. But I mean, I personally haven't, this is where I say we're all on the same page, I haven't found it hard to get a machine with an ISA slot, ISA. So the 386 I've been tinkering about with, granted, I did get that at mates rates, but it really wasn't expensive. And even if it wasn't at mates rates, it wouldn't have been much more expensive. Probably because it's a 386, not a 486. Obviously, a 486 is the DOS machine most people go for. I'm pretty sure the slot one build that I've got, which is a Pentium 3 era board waiting for me back in the UK, which is one of my original machines. I'm pretty sure that's got 2 ISA slots in it as well. But by that period, they were there, but you didn't want to use them. You wanted everything to be PCI. And if it was on the board, AGP for graphics. So yes, it was there, but it was only because of legacy. So again, the project is interesting. It's fantastic. Well done for figuring out it can be done. Not something I'll be doing.
Yeah, as for myself, I think that even things like continuing to use discs instead of Gotex, it's along the same lines. You don't need to. There's no real justification for it. Or when I eventually do build my C64 and Amiga using the PCBs I've got, there's no real reason for them. In fact, there's no real reason to use real hardware at all. Emulation does the job just fine. It's only because you want to use it that you do it. Neil, Chris, have I hit your?
Well, I was just thinking, you wouldn't tile a wall with Gotex.
That's true.
No, that's a good point.
That is a very good point.
You wouldn't tile a wall with working discs.
True. Chris?
Yeah, no, one thing I did want to say, and the only reason I didn't say it was because I forgot to scroll to the next page of the notes, but it is relevant here, is what I do like about this project is it's finding use of old ports on a modern motherboard, and that actually does float my boat. So on the PC I'm using right now to record this podcast, when I originally bought it, I'd noticed that it had an LPT and COM header.
Yeah.
And straight away, I went and grabbed, from one of the local PCs, off eBay, so that I could actually have those ports on the back of my machine. And this machine right now is genuinely plugged directly into the back of my A500 for reasons via an RS-232 cable, because I can, no USB adapters, none of that, genuine COM header, straight. And if I wanted to, I could plug in an old dot matrix to this PC because of the LPT header. Fantastic. Love that kind of stuff. Sorry, just didn't want to forget to say that.
No, and you're right. It's I also like the idea that there's hidden secrets in our hardware that you can peel away and find an old thing that shouldn't be there anymore. But the whole point of this is not because it needed done. It's because it could be done. So it's a great video to watch for entertainment. It's not a huge amount of point to it, although maybe someone will think it's what they need to do. But give it a watch. And only you can be the judge of what is worthwhile doing.
So one of my favorite YouTube channels at the moment, ironically, is not one of the YouTube retro guys that we're all into. It's actually the BBC. I'm sorry, Neil. It's not you. It's not Mark. It's
After
not even
I said
me.
such nice things about your channel.
I'm sorry. No, but it's the BBC Archive, right? And they just drop such fantastic clips, and that is part of the nostalgia journey. This particular clip was shared by Reading Glasses Man. And the clip is from a show called Saturday Superstore, originally broadcast on the 3rd of March, 1984. In it, Sarah Green, who is a presenter I do actually recall from back in the day, and she's joined by 3 very young video game reviewers, Dominic, Duncan, and Cassie, who are tasked with reviewing and rating top-selling games, and one new release as well, to see if they're actually any good. So the games reviewed, they're all reviewed on the ZX Spectrum just to keep things even, as they explain in this article, in this piece. And they basically cover Manic Miner, A Tick Attack, and Ant Attack. And Bear Bother is the new release that they also cover as well.
Bear Bother.
Bear Bother. Bit of bother. Bit of Bear Bother. That's right. Yeah. Good job I'm from England. Otherwise, I wouldn't understand that at all. Bother. It's actually riveting viewing for me anyway, because it's something I've not really touched on in this nostalgia trip, but it's not just about being transported back to my childhood and back to the 80s and 90s, but because I've moved to a different country, it is about being transported back to where I came from, which is very special to me. And the games covered hold plenty of memories as well, even if, for many of us as well, even if not all of them you may have played on the ZX Spectrum. And I also see this clip as a classic example of don't work with animals or children, but in a charming way, as the youngsters, probably friends of the BBC cast or crew, really do try their best to be on the telly, but it's really not perfect. But with all that said, what struck me about this TV clip from 1984 is how young the kids look. They don't even look old enough to have their grubby little hands on a ZX Spectrum. So, guys, your game picks from 1984, any platform, what would you go for?
I've just had a thought there on the age of them. Is it because gaming was definitely for kids and only for kids at that point in the 80s, and it's taken a long time for adults now to be able to game without judgment? Anyway, and is it controversial?
I would jump in and say yes and no. I think more so in the UK microcomputer scene, less so perhaps in the US scene, where it was far more expensive to get an Apple II or a PET or something like that. Yeah. But there were games on those systems. So I think there's probably going to be quite a lot of regional variation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And is it controversial of me to say that I prefer the footage on that recorded thing on YouTube that's kind of VHS quality of the videoed CRTs rather than I do a nice clean feed on a flat screen monitor? Mark?
Yeah, it's not controversial if you say you prefer watching it, but it's controversial if you prefer filming it because it's not easy.
Heck yeah.
So
Oh, no.
back then, matching that
yeah.
frame rate without digital technology, I was looking at that. I was agog. What an absolute stunning job they did.
And also lighting the scene without getting reflections on the CRT. It's just the worst. I have this great big black sheet that I hang up, and sometimes I create a booth around myself, a tent around the CRT when I record. Because I agree with Dave, it's nice to get a recording of a CRT rather than just a straight capture. But it's so much easier just to get a straight capture.
If you look at the LGR did a fantastic behind the scenes episode where he goes into the detail of the post production that is involved with filming a CRT. If you're making money out of your hobby, then good on you. That's fantastic to go have that much time on your hands. But for everybody else, whatever works. Absolutely. No judgment.
So for my favourite or the best game on the Spectrum in 1984, it would be Rebel Star Raiders from Julian Gollop. He would then follow up with Chaos, then Rebel Star 1 and 2, then Laser Squad and Lords of Chaos. They were all riffing in the same kind of board game style rule strategy game. And that would, of course, lead us to UFO Enemy Unknown, magic game. Neil?
You just mentioned UFO Enemy Unknown last weekend. I can't remember if I mentioned on last week's show, but somebody dropped in with a box of discs for me, which came from the Skip outside Microprose when they were based at Tetbury in the UK. And one of the discs in there was UFO Enemy Unknown for the Amiga, labelled as the master disc, which would go off for duplication.
Oh, that's cool.
I have that in the collection. And
I hope... I would be fascinated to find out if you've got Laser Squad 2 in there, because originally UFO Enemy Unknown was Laser Squad 2. It was being done on the ST, and Microprose said, go away and make it into a much more in-depth game.
Yes.
Right. Okay. And Mark, as we have him on the show, I know he has some background in duplication or deduplication, don't you, of floppies?
Yeah.
And so I may be working with Mark on a future episode. Get the band back together, make a video about that.
And when we talk about duplication of floppies, we don't mean that Mark worked on a market stall selling pirates.
How do you know that?
It was a proper duplication.
How do you know that? I had the means,
that's not what
I had
we mean.
The access, and I had the motive.
Going to a market stall and paying £2 for a floppy disk and saying, hang on, this is an original. I paid for a pirate. So Gollop's amazing talent was translating tabletop games or tabletop style rules into the home computer. I love that style of game. But of course, the best game of 1984 is Elite on the BBC Micro, and I don't need to explain why. Now, it's great that you mentioned this story, Chris, because I watched an amazing video from Rose Tinted Spectrum the other day, and it's due for public release after we record this today, so it will be there for Saturday, so there'll be a link in the show notes. And what Rosie has done is he asked his viewers for their top Spectrum games. He put them through a vote on Twitter, a kind of a knockout system, and he got their top 10, and he put that into a video, and he added a lot of depth into it. And then with the ones that lost, he made his own top 10, and he proposed that his top 10 is better than his viewers. I think he's right, but it's a great video to watch. It's such a balanced top 10 he's come out with. The pair of videos are superb, so Spectrum fans and other people might want to watch that.
Well, I mean, going back to 1984, I mean, Sarah Green. I mean, Sarah Green, come on.
Very knowledgeable, wasn't she?
She was so knowledgeable.
She did admit at the start of the clip that she wasn't a gamer, so honest too.
I like a bit
knowledgeable,
of naivety.
honest.
I like a bit of naivety in my presenters. I do, you know. And
That's
it's
why you're here.
Yeah, it's nice to see her on the BBC, and I could watch that video all day. My game choice, honestly, for nostalgia, no technical anything, would literally just be Jet Set Willy. It felt like an epic mansion you were actually roaming around in. and I've got this like seemingly false memory that you could get to Hades by going down the toilet, and I'm not sure if that was on somebody else's computer or some different version or a hacked version, but I definitely have that memory. So if anyone can help me out there, let me know. Maybe Dave, do you know?
I've got the same memory, and I remember trying to do it on the CPC version, and I'm pretty certain I never got it to happen in the CPC version, but I'm still sure something happened there. But is it one of these things that it's all this false memory that we all share?
Are you sure? I feel like I remember something like this. Are you sure it wasn't a glitch where you could go out the right-hand side of the screen or something and end up in Hades rather than down the toilet? Because down the toilet is where you go when you've completed the game, isn't it? You get all the objects, you go back, and you dive down the toilet.
Spoilers.
I'm not entirely sure if I'm going off the right-hand side of the screen or down the toilet, Neil, because I'm not entirely sure if I'm even remembering correctly. So I'm afraid there's no points for accuracy on my side here. But no, I'd be interested to know if anybody has any more information on that. Watching that video, it was brilliant, not just because Sarah Green was on it, but I think it was probably a more placid time back then. We didn't have sort of TikTok that the kids have these days and everything firing off and everything being loud and all music being compressed to get everybody's attention and the adverts coming on louder. Because I love the beeper sound from my ZX Spectrum, and I actually amplified it by rigging it up to my, I think it was a Seisho own brand, was that Curry's stereo? Don't know, but yeah. So for me, I love watching the video. I love seeing Sarah Green appearing on the BBC, and I could watch a video of that all day long, quite frankly.
Well, Manic Miner, which is shown in the video, was 1983. But Jet Set Willy was 84, wasn't it? So you're asking me to pick an 84 game that you guys haven't already chosen. So Elite is a very strong choice from Dave. Tetris came out in 1984, which prompts me to ask, have you seen the movie yet?
Not yet.
No, me neither. No, okay. We'll maybe
Everybody's
get to that.
talking about it, though. Everybody says it's good.
Yeah, but I'm the kind of person where it puts me off if everyone's talking about it. I'm like, okay. So you had Tetris, you had Rescue on Fractalus in 84. That's a good game. Paperboy in 84. King's Quest in 84. But as Chris is asking the question, a guaranteed winner, F-15 Strike Eagle, Chris, 1984.
I didn't have my Amiga back then, and I'm sorry, in the 8-bit era, flight sims just sucked. They really did.
Bad.
Oh,
they
no,
really
I thought that was a guaranteed
sucked.
winner.
No.
Oh, no. Right,
no.
wow.
Carry on.
Yeah, so on this video itself, and by the way, if anyone wants to watch this video or anything else we've talked about, you'll find the links in the notes, in the show notes. One thing that stood out for me, the kids keep calling levels sheets. Did you notice that? They call the levels sheets. Oh, Dave's holding up his copy of F-15. See, Dave's on my side. There's one child who says he likes it when Dracula drains his blood and the turkey runs out. That was a choice quote. He was talking about Attic Attack there. And then the poor kids have to play...
Which game? Say it again.
Attic Attack.
Okay.
And then the poor kids have to play Ant Attack using the Dead Flesh keyboard on the Specky because, as I recall, the game has no joystick support. So their fingers are all contorted on the Dead Flesh trying to play the game. And they do complain about the controls. You know, it's not a given that we think back and go, oh, yeah, that's just how it was and we dealt with it. No, that was a horrible way to play that game. So, they complained about that. And it's all filmed in an old electronics store. And I liked looking at the background, looking at how the store was laid out and the signage. And it offered me some inspiration for some things I might like to do in the cave in future. Not right now, because I'm still recovering from the last DIY session. But there was some good inspiration on there. But also how not to do things. So, for example, some of the scenes, the kids are playing games and they're looking at the TV at like an 80-degree angle, 3 inches away above them. Did you notice that? Yeah. It does not look comfortable. It looks like they're positioned just to get them all in shot. That doesn't look good at all. But there is some good inspiration to be had, some nice signage that I'd like to recreate. I quite like that. But I would encourage anyone who's listening to this to watch the video because there is just this pure thread, this seam of nostalgia for any British kid who grew up in the 80s, from the presenters to the Going down to Tottenham Court Road in London and the background in the electronics store and the systems. It's just pure nostalgia, this video. It'll only take 5 minutes of your time and you'll feel warm and fuzzy for it.
And it's got Sarah Green in it.
It does indeed.
That.
Yeah, it does indeed. Did you mention? Yeah, I think we mentioned that. Back to those grubby-handed little tykes. What I'd love to know is, did Dominic, Duncan, and Cassie continue to play games? Are any of them listening to us now, perhaps? Who knows?
Well, Duncan is.
Yeah, Duncan. Duncan. I think he's still involved in the retro. And maybe Dominic. Who knows? But I did the calculations, obviously, because they're quite simple ones. And I was 10 in 1984. And yes, my hands were probably equally grubby. And I was possibly just that small and clueless as well myself back then. But it's not how I remember it. I remember myself as being an expert, and anybody younger than me at the time was too young to understand how to play computer games correctly. It's an ageist snobbery that's followed me for, well, probably about 40 years, if I'm honest. The outcome of their scoring, I guess that's quite important. Getting back to the point of the video, meant that Attic Attack came out on top. And that's an outcome I can get behind, actually, because it's a game I have tons of love and nostalgia for. Probably one of the very first Spectrum games I ever played before I had one myself, and that was on my mate Daniel's ZX Spectrum at his house. The presenter, Sarah Green, is equally confused about how to pronounce Attic Attack, or Attic Attack, as I am to this day, which made me smile as well. She makes a thing of that. So let's have the discussion here. Let's settle it once and for all, guys. Is it pronounced Attic Attack or Attic Attack?
Yes.
Attic Attack.
Attic Attack.
Attic Attack.
Okay, let's go one by one. Yeah. Dave.
Attic Attack.
Mark.
Attic Attack.
Chris.
Attic Attack.
And for me, it's Attic Attack. So I think there's 1 for Attic Attack and 3 for Attic Attack, right?
Interesting.
I'm in the middle. I think it's Attic Attack, but it sounds like both. I think it's meant to sound like both.
Maybe. Yeah, but you play Sam and Max, so...
Yeah.
Every episode.
My SNES.
It's Attic Attack, as in the location within the house. Because you go into the attic of the house, don't you?
Was it a typo?
How's it spelled, though?
Was it a typo?
It's not spelled.
I think it was just some kind of...
It was intentionally doing Attic Attack as well as Attic Attack. It was both.
Marketing.
Nothing but the best covered by us this week. Anyway.
And what a fabulous cover. What fabulous artwork on that, by the way. I mean, it's really, you know, and the loading screen on the Spectrum looks fabulous as well. Really sort of gave you a sense of dread looking at it. So...
But interestingly, the description on the BBC Archive video states the following, and I assume they mean in 1984 because they try and transport you back. What they say is this. Incidentally, the complete inaugural UK video game top 10 is as follows. At number 10, Revenge of the Mutant Camels, Commodore 64. Coming in at number 9, Mr. Wimpy on the Spectrum.
Mark's favourite.
At number 8, Pole Position on the Atari? Yeah, Atari. Number 7, The Hobbit on the Spectrum. Number 6,
Brilliant.
Manic Miner, also on the Spectrum. Number 5, Fighter Pilot, another one for Neil, also on the ZX Spectrum. Number 4, Hunchback on the Spectrum. Number 3, Ant Attack on the Spectrum. Number 2, Attic Attack or Attic Attack on the Spectrum. And number 1, it's once again Manic Miner, but this time on the Commodore 64. So we won't allow it because that's an international machine and not as good as a Spectrum. All right.
It's a nice range of games there, and I would fathom that anyone who collects has probably got The Hobbit, whether they know about it or not, because it's one of those games where the label always falls off. It's always that unmarked black box that you have in your collection of games. It's always going to be The Hobbit. Yeah, Dave's nodding. Mark?
I think it's really nice to see in 1984 the massive deep penetration that the Spectrum had in the UK market. I mean, you've got Atari in there, you've got Commodore 64 appearing twice, but look at that, number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 9 Spectrum, even with Mr. Wimpy, which is a terrible Burger Time ripoff, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's the appeal of the Spectrum. It came out and people could afford it. There's no way. I mean, before the Spectrum came out, the C64 was expensive, The Atari 8-bits were not cheap either, and the Apple II was very dear. The BBC was super expensive, and the Spectrum was lovely and cheap.
Do we think the one Atari entry in their pole position, do we think that's the 2600?
I would guess so.
Another system.
Difficult to say. Even by 1984, it was a 2600 still going strong enough to sell that.
It was still
It never
going.
stopped.
Yeah.
Junior.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah, I'd bet that it's on the BCS stroke 2600. Yeah.
Anyway, links are in the show notes. Do watch that video because it's fantastic.
Time now for last week's community question of the week, which you can participate in at reddit.com/r/thisweekinretro. So last week's question was, what is the newest item of tech that you consider to be retro? Now, this was off the back of the question last week of, was the PS3 retro? And we had a discussion about that. You can go back and listen to that if you're interested in hearing our opinion. Dave is bouncing up and down. Go on, Dave.
Yeah, we had so many replies and comments on Twitter and on YouTube and on the subreddit about the PS3 being retro. So many interesting viewpoints. I think the basic opinion is it's not retro for me, but it might be for other people. I think people were on the right trail with it. I think they broadly agree. But it's really interesting to read all those comments last week.
And I didn't see any nasty comments. Which is really nice for such a hot topic. You normally get a few trolls in the mix, but everyone was just so respectful of one another and just posting their thoughts. It was really nice. So keep that up. Well done. You're a good audience. Duncan has put a note in here. He says, personally, I have a hard time thinking of anything PS1 or after as retro. So Duncan's going all the way back to, what's that, 1994? I would go later than that. I would, Dreamcast, PS2.
Early double O's.
Yeah. And I'm still... Go on, Mark.
I think I'm with Duncan on that, actually, because for me, the PS1 was kind of my first console that I bought as an adult. And it goes back to what we were saying earlier. Were games just meant for children back in 1984? And I think one of the things to realise is that gaming started kind of when we were young, but there's been a maturation of gaming through the ages.
Yes.
So whilst there are games for children now, there's also games that have grown with us as the first people in the market. So that's why you've got things like your GTA 5s and games where there's been uproar because of the extreme violence and stuff. And people still who aren't au fait with gaming think that games are just for children. So why does this game exist where you can jump in a hot rod and run people over in the street? And the answer is because I want to do it.
So our top answer comes from Alex McChessers. And Alex says, now that Nintendo have closed the 3DS eShop, it's become retro for me. I bought a good number of games for it when it was a current system, but it's now crossed the piracy morality medium. I like that, the piracy morality medium, where I don't feel bad about installing a custom firmware and downloading ROMs of games I missed, as well as exploring homebrew and emulators on it. As a result, I'm re-engaging with the system and enjoying it again. Besides, I brought it into work the other day and someone said, I haven't seen one of those in a while. If that doesn't make it retro, then I don't know what does. That's a good answer. Strong answer.
That is a very good answer.
Yeah.
And Generation Pixel came in with a good answer, saying, there's only one correct answer to this, and that's all this influx of newly pressed vinyl records. I'm just waiting for one of these newfangled bands to be told you can record Spectrum games on vinyl. And what game would Carly Rae Jepsen, see, I'm down with the kids, put on a B-side? A Rockstar 8 Mile Hamster, perhaps? Well, call me crazy.
I'm pretty sure that only last year there was a vinyl released as it was probably one of the upsells on Fusion Retro's books, one of their books, and it was music from the ZX Spectrum. I think there might have been a ZX Spectrum game on there, so I think it's been done fairly recently.
You've got a couple of ZX Spectrum vinyls and flexi discs in the cave, haven't you, Neil?
I have. I've got the one from the Thompson twins, and I've got the one from Frank Sidebottom. What's his name? Ian Sidley? Is
Chris,
it? No,
Chris
Seavey.
Seavey.
Chris Seavey. Yeah. So I've got one from him, which has some interesting, pretty basic games on there, but it's a fun concept. Yeah. Who's going to read the next answer?
I think I will, because I like where he's gone with this. So Namco says, newest item of retro tech, the Amiga drawbridge. I did get the cable some time ago, but it was only in the last few months that I'd gotten the correct floppy drive to install and use it. Why is it retro? It uses a USB floppy drive. The drawbridge rewrites Amiga disks. So 2 things he sees as retro is the USB floppy drive and the drawbridge. But I'd also say that's retro because that's the correct use of the term retro in terms of it's kind of in the style of something of the past.
Yeah.
So
I'd agree.
I like
And
it.
that's a reference to a project by Rob Smith, which I covered on the channel, robsmithdev.co.uk, who also made the retro directory, retro.directory. So Rob's doing some wonderful things for the community, and he's a lovely guy to boot.
I need one.
He also made some fantastic music.
Okay, Dave, you got that in there. You shoehorned your Robert Smith reference in there. Well done. Other answers that stood out include mini disc players from STFM. Tech Made Easy says, how about early iPods? Oz Retrocom, LCD screens with a 4:3 aspect ratio.
Oh, love me one of them. So useful.
Really?
Yeah.
They are great.
There's a lot of answers in here. Warshi7819 talks about Xbox 360s and PS3s, so coming into that generation. Pajako, GameCubes and original Xboxes are on his limit of retro currently. I think this might be the most answered one we've had in a long time here. Taster there's a lot of numbers in this name, so I'm sorry, but they say my arcade Space Invaders mini cabinet runs the original ROM, has a fantastic reflected screen and backdrop art. So that's a modern thing, but it's retro.
Yeah.
Running the original ROMs, that's open to debate, I guess. So there we go. Thank you, everyone, for taking part in last week's question of the week. And Dave, do you want to do this week's question of the week?
Yeah. Why are all of the other presenters wrong about their pronunciation this week?
That is not the question of the week. Let's move to Chris. Chris, would you like to do this week's question of the week?
Oh, is it taken away from me now? Have I ruined it now?
Taking it away.
Muting Dave now. So this week's question of the week is, what was your favourite childhood snack that you can no longer buy? Absolutely nothing to do with retro technology unless you say Space Invaders crisps.
Well, you might have had snacks when you were playing on your video games as a kid. Leave your answers at reddit.com/r/This Week in Retro, where you will find the question of the week pinned to the top. You can also submit stories that you might like us to consider for the next episode and just participate in the conversation. And that conversation continues at discord.gg/RMC Retro, where we have a dedicated room to the show, or you can just break out into all the other rooms and chat with us all day long. Once again, a huge thank you to, was it Mike who became our 50th patron today?
Yes.
Dave? Thank you so much to Mike and to everyone else who has become a patron of the show. It really is snowballing into a wonderful community, and we appreciate everything that you do in submitting the stories to give us something to talk about every week. And we'll see you next Saturday, same time next week. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much for coming on, Mark. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
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 This Week in Retro was presented by Neil from RMC The Cave, Chris from 005 AGIMA, and Dave. It was produced by me, Duncan Styles. The podcast version of the show is available through your favourite podcaster, including Apple Podcast and Spotify, and the video version is available on the This Week in Retro YouTube channel.
Join our community subreddit at r/thisweekinretro to suggest and vote on the stories we cover on the show. If you watch This Week in Retro on YouTube, please give us a like and subscribe to help us reach new viewers.
If you enjoy our show and would like to support it, then please check out the link to our Patreon page in the show notes or description. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time for more up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.